The new Modern Warfare 2 is extremely mediocre. Every aspect of this game, from its campaign, multiplayer, spec ops, and online service, is a mixed bag at best and unfinished at worst. Despite that, Modern Warfare 2 might be the best Call of Duty since the Xbox 360 and PS3 console generation died in 2013. This is going to be an in-depth, all-encompassing review of every aspect of Modern Warfare 2, from the campaign to multiplayer and spec ops, as well as a review of the first season of its live service and commentary on the rumors surrounding its future content. Given the length of this review, I highly encourage you to listen to it as a podcast. Feel free to put it on in the background while you do busy work or play video games. I have a lot more to say than I initially thought I would, which, as you'll see, turned out to be a good and a bad thing. Timecodes are in the description if you want to skip to whatever part of the game you're most interested in, and my campaign review will contain spoilers. Strap yourselves in because it's going to be a long one. Modern Warfare 2019 was a divisive game in the COD community, but one thing I absolutely loved about it was the campaign. Now, I know a lot of people don't give a rat's ass about COD campaigns and just want to jump into the multiplayer, but I'm a big fan of a lot of COD campaigns. Whether the game has a good or bad campaign has a lot to do with whether the rest of the game is going to be good or not, since the campaign is often the foundation for the game's multiplayer and co-op mode. Say what you will about the multiplayer or spec ops, but Modern Warfare 2019 has my second favorite campaign in the series, and is only bested by World at War. The serious, realistic tone the game took was not only a throwback to the roots of the franchise, but it took it to new heights. So many of the engagements were completely unique to the franchise, and the story had characters with strong motivations and moral compasses, and left what was right and wrong up to interpretation. It didn't assume the characters you played as were morally in the right all of the time, even if your goals were for the greater good or if your intentions were pure. Modern Warfare's campaign had a lot of thought put into it and left the player with a lot to think about. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the sequel. The new Modern Warfare 2 makes the same mistakes the original Modern Warfare 2 did by transitioning the franchise into an action movie, and just like the original, it's done in the most ham-fisted way possible. The plot of this game is utter nonsense, and we're gonna break it all down for you. We start the game with the killing of Iranian General Ghobrani. We have no idea who this person is or the context of what's happening, but we kill him with a missile. This is suddenly the most important event in the entire rebooted franchise, as it inspires Hassan Zain to plot against the United States, which is the focus of this entire game. We spend 3 minutes on it. The first real mission of the game is Soap and Ghost trying to capture Hassan. He slips out of their grasp when the two attempt to rescue the survivors of a helicopter crash, but they end up finding something far more disturbing. It turns out Hassan has access to American missiles. Laswell wants to get information on the missiles, but General Shepard, who isn't suspicious in the slightest, wants the missiles destroyed instead. So they're destroyed and Laswell has to get information the long and hard way. The game moves forward and we learn that Hassan's terror cell, the Quds Force, is working with the Mexican cartel in Las Almas, so Laswell, who is returning from the first game, gets in contact with Alejandro Vargas of the Mexican Special Forces to help out. Alejandro and his partner, Rodolfo Parra, catch Hassan and some accomplices crossing the border into the United States. The two of them cross the border as well to chase after Hassan, but Alejandro lets Hassan escape in order to save a wounded Rodolfo from a burning building. So they didn't catch Hassan after he crossed into the United States, so naturally the next time we see Hassan, he's back in Mexico. The entire point of that last mission was Hassan entering the United States, and all we know he did was run around some poor trailer park, blow up a couple cop cars with an RPG, light a house on fire, and leave. My only guess is either the writers meant to show Hassan doing something in the United States before we find him in Las Almas again, and that just got cut for some reason, or it was a ham-fisted attempt at social commentary. That obvious plot hole aside, we're in Las Almas with Ghost and Soap, and they meet up with Alejandro and Rodolfo with the goal of taking down Hassan together. And eventually they do, but before we get there, I have a complaint that isn't related to plot holes. There's a scene in a car that is setting up the location of Las Almas, and it does a great job of giving the context of a location in not very much time. There's just one problem, and it's a subtle one. Alejandro makes the point that the name of the leader of the Las Almas cartel is El Sin Nombre. Whenever Ghost or Soap call him Sin Nombre, Alejandro prominently corrects them that it is El Sin Nombre. In Spanish, El is a masculine term, and the prominent use of masculine pronouns in English reinforces the idea that El Sin Nombre is definitely a man. What it actually did was immediately give away the twist that El Sin Nombre is actually a woman. There's another botched twist later on, but we'll get to that one later. Over the course of the next few missions, we track Hassan down and eventually capture him. We take him out to the middle of nowhere at night to interrogate him, and even though we know he is the leader of one of the most powerful terrorist cells in the world, we have to let him go because it's illegal to hold him. While you think about just how stupid that is in and of itself, I'll show you some of the illegal things we're currently doing in Modern Warfare 2. For starters, I don't know the legality of Soap and Ghost assisting Mexican Special Forces with capturing Hassan. Jurisdiction would be questionable, just like how jurisdiction was questionable when Alejandro and Rodolfo crossed the Mexican-American border to chase after Hassan earlier in the campaign. And speaking of breaking laws, when Hassan says he hasn't broken any laws, we know that's not true. He crossed the Mexican-American border illegally, and Alejandro and Rodolfo are direct witnesses to that crime and the murder of several American cops once he crossed that border. Also, the whole reason Graves and Shadow Company are with us on this mission is because it's a legal loophole. It's a reasonable take to say that half the people in this interrogation are in the country illegally. In fact, some madman on Reddit went through the whole campaign and counted 22 war crimes committed by the quote-unquote heroes throughout the entire campaign. One of those war crimes happens exactly 0 minutes after this interrogation cutscene ends, when Price, Gaz, and Laswell go to Spain to find one of the missing missiles in the very next mission. In fact, Laswell explicitly states that the next mission is off the books because they don't have jurisdiction to be in Spain. This cutscene happens exactly 0 minutes after we let Hassan go because it was illegal. Anyway, the mission in Spain is going well for a bit before suddenly going very poorly. Laswell is captured by Alcatala, and Price and Gaz need to go and save her. She is in Urzikstan, and Shepard isn't able to help us in time, so we meet up with Farah from the first game, and with her help we free Laswell. As a side note, I really hate this mission. The whole mission is to drive forward. That's basically it. There's one path that you can't deviate from, and all you really have to do is press and hold right trigger to move the car forward, and occasionally lean out of the car to shoot people. Farah is reduced to a Mad Max clone, and the part where Gaz is hanging upside down from a plane is more than a little bit absurd. By COD standards, this is entirely plausible, but something like this would have never made it into Modern Warfare. But we get to the end of the mission, we free Laswell, and then she starts talking. Somehow, while on a truck in the middle of a desert being transported by some nameless Alcatala thugs, she figures out that the missiles were actually never in Spain, but their guidance systems were. She also figured out that the guidance systems are now on the missiles themselves, and that El Nombre is the only person in the entire world other than Hassan who knows where the missiles are right now. Keep in mind, the only thing that happened between the last time she was with us and now was that she was captured by an unrelated terror cell, transported from Spain to the Middle East, and was stuck in a moving truck for a few hours. All of this took place in less than a day, and she was in captivity that entire time. So how she figured out any of this is beyond me. We are never told when or where she got this massive exposition dump of information from, which leaves me to assume that the grunts transporting her across the desert were far more knowledgeable than they should be and willing to chit-chat, or some unnamed Alcatala leader has a supervillain-esque monologue that we just didn't see. Or, the most likely option, the writers were hack frauds. Anyway, now that Laswell pulled this new exposition out of her ass, it's really important that we find El Nombre. And we know from our first mission with Alejandro that nobody knows who or where El Nombre is. So in the next cutscene, we just show up at his house. How do we know where this is, and why didn't Alejandro go there years ago if we know this is where he is? Anyway, the plan is for Soap to walk to the front door and swap information. In the meantime, Alejandro breaks into the house, kills a guard, steals and wears his uniform, and is able to blend in perfectly, making Soap's entire plan pointless. I'm sure they all would have reconsidered the plan if they knew Alejandro could just do that without Soap risking his life, but Alejandro was able to make up for it by getting Soap a disguise of his own. Now, an important thing to note is all of the goons in this house are wearing black suits and black masks. Meanwhile, Soap is wearing jeans and a blue shirt, and while Alejandro is able to get a perfectly fitting black suit and a mask for himself, he's a cheap fuck and can only get Soap a white mask and no suit. I guess everyone in the compound is literally blind because somehow nobody can see the difference between a well-fitting black suit, and a guy in jeans and a t-shirt. I also want to remind you that Soap can barely speak any Spanish, which is kind of an important detail if you want to blend in with people who are speaking only Spanish. Thankfully, everyone in the compound is able to ignore the evidence of their eyes and ears and let Soap and Alejandro capture El Sin Nombre after the not-so-shocking reveal that El Sin Nombre is in fact a woman. The team proceeds to interrogate her for information. We learn her and Alejandro were both in the army together, which doesn't lead anywhere. We also learn her motivation for working with Hassan and the terrorists, which is, if there is a war on terror, there will be no war on drugs, which is a statement so ignorant of American history it makes my blood boil. Firstly, as a red-blooded American, I can confirm firsthand that you can both have a war on terror and a war on drugs at the same time and fail at both of them in spectacular fashion. Maybe she meant that the war on drugs would never succeed while there was also a war on terror, which means there would be value in preserving the war on terror, but that assumes the war on drugs would ever succeed in any reality in the first place. Secondly, we learn that she was aware of what Hassan's plan is, which makes her entire motivation even more nonsensical since Hassan's goal is to essentially destroy America. Given how much drugs cartels in real life export to the United States, it seems like an obviously bad idea to let a terrorist attempt to destroy one of your biggest client bases. This whole interaction just feels like another case of a writer's desperately trying to shoehorn in some geopolitical overtones that the original Modern Warfare had into the sequel without any thought about how it connects to the game or reality itself. The most important thing we get out of this interrogation is the location of what is believed to be the second and final missing missile, and in exchange the team promises to let her go, but only after the missile is destroyed. Remember all of my ranting about how they also let Hassan go after they captured him? Yeah, you could repeat everything I said there. We know for a fact she is the leader of one of the most dangerous drug cartels in the world. Why on earth, under any context, are we letting her go? Anyway, the team is able to destroy the second missile, and upon returning to base, Graves and Shadow Company decide to take Alejandro's forward operating base for themselves because he wants it. Yeah, that's the motivation for the big betrayal in this game. Guy wants some infrastructure, and Shepard is okay with letting him have it if it gets them closer to Hassan, aka the guy they already detained and had the opportunity to not let go earlier on in this game. A fight breaks out after this is revealed. Alejandro is detained while Soap and Ghost escape. Soap is shot through the bicep while Ghost escapes unharmed. Graves then sends Shadow Company through the town with orders to massacre the entire population if they don't tell him where Hassan is. I have a hard time believing American PMCs would follow through with that kind of an order, but worse things have happened in war. The difference is that this just felt like an excuse to recontextualize Graves as the bad guy by doing the most outrageous thing possible. Ghost makes his way to the church at the center of town and is up to an injured, unarmed Soap to make his way there and regroup. At first glance, this is a really interesting idea for a mission, and the crafting system adds a nice touch to what would have otherwise been a normal non-violent stealth mission. The problem I have is that rather than letting you explore the entire town and move creatively through that town to get to Ghost, the developers added one mostly linear path for you to travel down with set ways for you to get past the guards. It could have been a really cool open world mission, but COD's extreme adherence to linearity got in the way of interesting gameplay. One of the central points of this mission, by the way, is Soap's bullet wound and how it's hard for him to fight. So when he and Ghost eventually do meet up and escape the town, Soap's bullet wound is healed and never mentioned again. Cool. When the two left the city, they went straight for Alejandro's safe house, which is the thing we just learned that he had. Thankfully, Rodolfo was there because for some reason he wasn't at the forward operating base or with us destroying the missiles. But he's back now, with a stash full of weapons and an armored vehicle. I'd like to point out that this location could have also been stocked with medical supplies, and if the writers gave Rodolfo some medical background, he could have patched up Soap and not have a giant plot hole in the game's turning point. Anyway, the three of them are able to break everyone out of jail, and Price and Gaz show up at the end to help us out. Why are they here now? Well, apparently, off-camera, Laswell was able to figure out everything about Shepard's betrayal, and was inclined to do so after he went dark. To nobody's surprise, it's Shepard's fault Hassan has American missiles, since it was a botched Shadow Company operation that caused them to fall into enemy hands. If this information was so easy for Laswell to access, it would have saved us a whole lot of trouble if she had done literally any pre-planning and did this sooner. But hey, what do I know? I don't work for the CIA. After breaking out of the prison and regrouping, the team is able to retake the FOB Graves took over and kill him. They interrogate Elsie Nombre again, and for no reason, she tells them there was actually one more missile in Chicago. To clarify, now the team knows there was a third missile that was unaccounted for, so they have that information, but why didn't Elsie Nombre give that information earlier? If they made a deal where she tells them the missile locations in exchange for freedom, why didn't she give them every location? She already did her job. Why does she care about protecting Hassan, especially if it poses a risk to her freedom? It's almost like it's only there so the writers could have a third act twist. So the team makes it to Chicago, but unfortunately it's too late. The missile launches and it's on its way to the White House. You know, Hassan could have probably picked a better location, you know, one that's maybe a little closer to the Washington, since this gives us plenty of time to disarm the missile. So we rush to catch him, we disarm the missile, and Ghost takes the shot to kill Hassan once and for all. We get one last scene in a bar with the whole 1-for-1 crew, and the plot wraps up in some of the dumbest ways humanly possible. Before we even get past the establishing shot, we are told via the news that the entire last mission was covered up by a power surge. Yeah, that missile that was launched from downtown Chicago, that giant rocket that launched from a downtown home to 250,000 people, and that would be visible to another 9 million? No. That was just a power surge. Don't worry about it. Shepard also just disappeared, apparently. I guess the writers didn't know what to do with him and punted on him. Anyway, Laswell reveals that it wasn't Hassan's men that stole the missiles from Shadow Company and Shepard, but that was actually Russian ultra-nationalists. She takes out a picture, slides it across the group, and the dramatic reveal is that it is a picture of Makarov. Obvious sequel bait is obvious, and there's an allusion to no Russian where we don't see anything. As a whole, Modern Warfare 2 has one of the worst plots in franchise history. The storyline is genuinely nonsensical. However, there are some bright spots that are worth noting. The best part about the campaign are the characters and their interactions. The banter between the members of 141 and the rest of the team is excellent. The new versions of Price and Gaz were able to win me over very easily in Modern Warfare, and their new versions of Ghost and Soap did the exact same thing here. As a group, Task Force 141 is far stronger than its original Modern Warfare 2 incarnation in 2009. I just wish they were doing things that made any sense at all. As far as the gameplay goes, there's some interesting additions and changes made. There's a number of missions that call back to missions from the original trilogy, and they work well for the most part. The problems start to arise when any mechanics from Warzone enter the picture. The most irritating mechanic borrowed from Warzone is occasionally enemies will be wearing armor that you have to break, which gives them plenty of time to shoot and kill you since you don't have armor more often than not. The best way to handle these kinds of enemies is to pick them off slowly from range without breaking from cover. It's boring, but it's only a major issue on the higher difficulties when you can get dropped super fast. There's also missions like Violence and Timing that are based on the vehicle mechanics in Warzone, which is also now a part of the Multiplayer and Spec Ops, so maybe that doesn't quite count. The crafting mechanics in Alone were also supposed to be a part of Warzone and DMZ, but as of right now, that mechanic isn't in either of those games. The crafting mechanics in Alone were also supposed to be a huge part of Warzone 2 and DMZ, but as of right now, that mechanic isn't in either of those games. However, some attempts to change the gameplay do work. Wet Work is an underwater stealth mission where you have to clear a dock while using water to sneak around. You have to manage your breath while not being seen and taking out guards silently. It's a cool idea. There's also a few returning gimmicks. While Soap's disguise in Elsie Nombre was absurd, this style of stealth mission we saw in World War II and Cold War works just as well in Modern Warfare 2. The camera command section in Prison Break works just as well as it did in Modern Warfare. And the last thing I expected from the final mission was a throwback to Call of Duty Ghosts of all games. Modern Warfare 2019 did a lot to make the game more than just a room clearing simulator, and it worked really well. And while Modern Warfare 2 attempts to outdo the original, the result is more of a mixed bag. That's more or less how I would describe the whole campaign. A mixed bag. While the game has one of the worst plots in franchise history, the characters and dialogue help redeem it somewhat. And while the gameplay tries to be more than a room clearing simulator, its execution can be really hit or miss. As a whole, the campaign is a clear step down from Modern Warfare and not worth seeking out on its own. If you already have the game for multiplayer or to progress in Warzone, then the campaign is a fine way to spend a couple hours to mix things up. You get some decent rewards you can use in multiplayer, and the character interactions are entertaining enough to keep you playing. Otherwise, I'd steer clear of this one. When it comes to COD multiplayer, there are a few things that I look for in a good game. Map quality and quantity, weapon balance, perks and creative class, kill streaks and or score streaks, progression in long-term goals, a variety of game modes and experiences, and of course, all the technical stuff. These 7 elements are the foundation for not just a good COD multiplayer, but a good game of any genre. And we're gonna grade Modern Warfare 2 on all of them. We'll start with the technical issues, because like any modern games as a service title, they're the first thing you'll notice. If you saw my review of the beta or have seen literally any online discussions surrounding the game, you'll be fully aware of just how abysmal this game's user interface is. Unfortunately, that has not changed since the beta. If you want a long-winded rant about how unusable the user interface is, watch my beta review. Most of the video is complaining about the UI, and mostly about navigating the UI. Today, I want to talk about its functionality, or lack of functionality. Halo Infinite has been getting dunked on for over a year for its slow and clunky UI, but after playing Modern Warfare 2, I will never complain about Infinite's UI again. This UI is a disaster. For starters, most of the time it just doesn't load. I'm playing on an Xbox Series X, the most powerful console available, and the UI will freeze for 10, 20, or even 30 seconds at a time. I literally don't even have time to edit my class between matches. Sure, I can do that in the match itself, but you aren't allowed to change things like your perks in the middle of a match. So you're stuck. It's also important because you won't be able to see what map is up next. If it's a map you don't like and don't want to play, you would be able to leave the lobby and search for a game on a different map. But because the UI doesn't load, oftentimes you won't know what map you're going to play until you're in the match. There's also a problem where your daily challenges will be on the top of names of everyone in the lobby. Like, I want to do the challenge to progress faster and the whole thing is unreadable. But the user interface isn't the only technical problem this game has, because the spawns are also a nightmare. In the past, spawns were always done away from the action, and that let the player observe what's happening in the match before deciding where they want to go, all while not being shot at immediately. In Modern Warfare 2, the game seems to spawn you next to your teammates, and for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to mind if those same teammates are currently being shot at. It's not uncommon to spawn with one or more enemy players looking directly at you. Even if there's not an enemy directly in your sightline, there's often not enough time to take in what's happening or react or formulate a plan of attack. The large-scale big team battle maps will let you pick a spawn, and while spawns have been bad in prior games, they've never been like this, so I don't know why this system is like this. It's especially weird because in Modern Warfare they had way too much room for spawning, and here we have the exact opposite problem. We need a fix for this by Christmas, or people are just gonna get tired of this. Speaking of getting tired, we'll quickly touch on the playlist variety, or lack of variety. We have 10 6v6 playlists, 4 of them have limited or no respawns, and 1 of them is free for all. The only respawn 6v6 modes Modern Warfare 2 has are Team Deathmatch, Kill Confirmed, Domination, Hardpoint, and Headquarters. This game launched without Demolition, Sabotage, Capture the Flag, War, Cranked, Uplink, Drop Zone. There's no standard 9v9 ground war playlist or any party games like Infection, Gun Game, One in the Chamber, Sharpshooter, Sticks and Stones, or Prop Hunt. This is the thing with these modern live service games, where they release with not very much content and promise to add content that should have been there at launch with the live service. And here's the bigger issue. The game modes that are in Modern Warfare 2 aren't bad. Ignoring the occasional issues with spawning, all of the respawn modes played just as well as they did in every prior game. And while I'm not a fan of limited or no respawn modes myself, I appreciate that they're in the game and that fans of those modes have more options. My issue is that all of the respawn modes give you exactly one way to experience the game. With the strict skill-based matchmaking these newer CODs have, these 5 modes give you exactly one kind of match. A competitive one. If you want a more casual social experience, Modern Warfare 2 doesn't have anything for you. You can't kick up your feet and hide in Prop Hunt or Infection, or relax and experience the game's weapon sandbox during a match of Gun Game or Sticks and Stones. There's also no large-scale dense battles like you would have in a Ground War playlist. Sure, there's a mode called Ground War alongside Invasion, but those are largely populated by AI and have their own dedicated maps. It's not a bad mode by any means, but it's very different from a traditional big team battle or Ground War playlist. There's also no small team playlist for 1v1s, 2v2s, or 3v3s. Hell, the game didn't even have a hardcore mode when the game launched, and is not going to have a ranked playlist until sometime next year? All of these game types have been in Call of Duty at one point or another, and were oftentimes in the same game together at the same time. So beyond having content to fill out the live service, I don't get why we have so few game modes. Switching gears, the map design is one thing that can make or break the multiplayer. The game could have the best gunplay in the series, kill streaks that are worth sweating over, and an addicting progression system, but if the maps aren't good, it's all for nothing. So how does Modern Warfare 2 do? Well, it Could have been worse. Don't get me wrong, there are some good maps in this game. Mercado Las Almas, Crown Raceway, Farm 18, and Alabaga Fortress are all strong offerings. However, once you get past those maps, things start to fall apart pretty quickly. First, it's worth noting that Modern Warfare 2 only launched with 10 multiplayer maps. It was supposed to launch with 11, but Vladiras Museum, which was playable in the beta for a while, is missing from the full game. So that's 10 maps for the launch of the game, and while 4 of them are pretty good, the rest aren't quite as good. The rest of the maps fall into one of two categories. They're either, okay, I can play this for a bit maps, or instantly leave a lobby if this map comes up maps. 3 of the game's 10 maps are in the latter category, and to rock and float between the two categories depending on the lobby, so that's a 30 to 40% chance I'm leaving the game when I see what map comes up. And I say when I see what map comes up because A, the UI is so broken I often can't see what map I'm playing until the match starts, and B, because there's no map veto or voting system in this game. The game will just pick a map and you're forced to play it. This is something modern FPS games have done, and I don't understand why. This is all speculation on my part, but I think the developers know these games don't have enough maps at launch, and their solution is to take away all player choice so they play 100% of the few maps in the game instead of just 80% of a larger selection. So for example, Black Ops 2 launched with 12 maps plus Nuketown 2025, and if you didn't like 3 of those maps, you basically had the same amount of maps as you do in Modern Warfare 2. But that doesn't mean we have to take away choice from the player. The game should have at least a dozen maps when they launch, but if that isn't possible, then use the live service to your advantage. We already know Shoot House and Shipment are returning for Season 1, and Vladiras Museum will hopefully return to the game sometime soon. That's another 3 maps in hopefully just a few months. So why are we removing these features when we know we're going to have a good amount of maps in just a few weeks or months? But moving back to the maps themselves, a key component to how the maps play is how the players move. The geometry and available routes have a huge impact on how the player acts and reacts in game. Combine that with the weapon sandbox and you have a pretty good idea on what playstyles are going to lead to success and become meta, and what isn't going to win you games. Movement in Modern Warfare 2 seems really weird. It seems like there are exactly 2 ways to play this game. Either you mount your gun and stare down a hallway for minutes at a time, or you're sliding, diving, bunny hopping, and drop shooting around every corner like you're auditioning for a pro team. There doesn't seem to be a healthy middle ground between these two, and I'm honestly not sure why this is happening. On the one hand, the ultra-aggressive playstyle has been popular among the tryhards for over a decade now, and with more and more people trying to become professional streamers and YouTubers, or even take a shot at an esports team, that's only going to grow. The players nowadays are also a lot more knowledgeable thanks to things like YouTube. Information about the game has never been more accessible, and people have had nearly 2 decades to figure out what works and what doesn't work in this type of FPS game. So needless to say, the skill of the average player has skyrocketed. The game also does some neat things to encourage movement. A debate I never thought I'd see settled in the COD community was the sliding versus dolphin diving debate. On the one hand, dolphin diving was really cool, allowed for the classic PhD flopper and zombies, and was the first to arrive in the series. And on the other hand, sliding was actually a useful way to move around the map in all game modes. And with Modern Warfare 2, Infinity Ward settled the debate by allowing players to slide and dive in the same game. I was really skeptical when Infinity Ward announced this. I thought it would lead to a clusterfuck of botched controls, accidentally sliding when you meant to dive and vice versa, but after playing with it for just a few hours, I knew it was a mechanic that I wanted to see return in every COD moving forward. It's easy to slide when you want to slide, and it's easy to dive when you want to dive. Diving feels sped up as a whole. It feels like an actually useful way to move around the map instead of just a gimmick. As for the defensive players, the game does a lot to slow down the pace of the game. Mounting basically turns any weapon into a laser, which makes holding down a line of sight an easy way to succeed. Also, most attachments slow down your aim down sight speed, which makes rushing and reacting to enemies far more challenging. You can build your classes to avoid that, but your attachment choices are going to be heavily restricted. But the big problem people like to point out is audio. Listening for enemy footsteps has always been a part of the series, but it's become a huge talking point since Modern Warfare. Infinity Ward cranked the footstep volume to 11 in that game, and the elephant-human hybrids return here. If the enemies are attentive listeners, and they likely will be since players are a lot smarter than they were a decade ago, moving will give away your position almost every single time. It's a lot easier to listen and react to moving players than it is for rushers to anticipate where enemies may be at any given time. To make matters worse, Dead Silence isn't a perk in this game, meaning there's not much aggressive players can do to counter. You can use the Dead Silence field upgrade, but it's only available for a few seconds at a time, and the player using the field upgrade sends out a loud microwave beeping sound that alerts everyone nearby that you are nearby, which kind of defeats the entire purpose of the field upgrade. If the enemy is camping inside a building, you can use the new drill charge equipment to punch through walls, but there's no guarantee that will work. Plus, the enemy can run this game's equivalent of flak jacket and survive the hit. Your options are pretty limited if you're going up against a good player who camps, which is a problem. It's not always fun to go up against such defensive players, and the game does a lot to make that the best style of play. Now, thankfully, most of the players I run into move around just fine and make the match enjoyable, and whenever I find a lobby of campers, I can leave the match and find a new one. However, past behavior is the best prediction for future behavior, and given what Modern Warfare was like in its prime, I don't know if this current split meta will last. Something that I do hope lasts is the weapon balance. You see, unlike the original Modern Warfare 2 back in 2009, this game has a sandbox that isn't terrible. It's been close to 2 months since the game released, and there still isn't a clear meta weapon for multiplayer. I see people running around with assault rifles, SMGs, LMGs, shotguns, snipers. Hell, I've seen more people using riot shields in this game than I've seen in any prior COD game ever. I don't know if this is because the weapon platform system is actually encouraging players to try out a whole bunch of different weapons, or if the sandbox is actually varied for the first time in decades. I don't think I've seen this much variety in the kill feed since Black Ops 1 or 2. For as good as the balance is, it's not perfect. The biggest issue I have is with the snipers and marksman rifles. There's not a lot of flinch with these weapons. If they're using focus and attachments that reduce flinch, which they're always going to use if they're good players, then all they have to do is get a shot off and they'll win the gunfight. There are some attachments you can use to increase the amount of flinch you deal to these enemies, but the odds are in their favor by a long shot. Now, there was an update not too long ago that claims to have increased the flinch with these weapons, and I haven't really ran into a skilled sniper since then, so I don't know how well it works in practice. We'll have to keep an eye on this and see what they do with these weapons. The only other major criticism I have is that I've noticed shotguns can be inconsistent at times. I don't know if that's a server thing or a damage thing. I also don't think riot shields should be available when using the overkill perk. I see a lot of people just stick a riot shield on their backs because their perk can't be used on anything else. It also reinforces the defensive playstyle even further, and it's something I've seen a lot of people online complain about as well. But my list of complaints about the weapon balance basically starts and ends with flinch on snipers, which might have even been fixed with this last update. So I'm gonna have to do something I don't do often and give Infinity Ward's multiplayer team a little bit of credit. I'll give credit for the weapon balance. What I won't give credit for is the perk system and created class. It's one of the worst in the franchise, and the biggest problem with it are the perks. So rather than having 3 categories of perks that you pick from, like in pretty much every prior game, you instead pick 2 perks that you start the match with, and over time you'll earn another 2 perks that are supposed to be more powerful. At face value, it's not a terrible idea. It's almost like a blend between specialist kill streaks and the support streaks from prior games, and it gives players who maybe aren't as good individual goals to work towards during a match. My issue is how it was implemented. The perks in Modern Warfare 2 simply don't feel impactful. There isn't that constant reevaluation between matches to see if you can improve your class even further. I have 2 days of playtime in this game, and I only ever use 1 per class. I get the game's equivalent of flak jacket and tac mask to make all grenade types less powerful against me, and that's what I spawn into every single game with. For the other 2, I go with hardline because it makes earning kill streaks a little less stressful, and then quick fix because it makes rushing and taking on multiple enemies at a time easier while picking up the pace of the match. Unless there's a challenge that requires using some other perk, that's what I use for every single class. It's frustrating because one of the best parts of COD, including some of the shittier ones, was constantly adjusting and tweaking your loadout. It's what separated the franchise from games like Halo back in the day, but now it feels like an afterthought. There's no difficult decisions for perks anymore. For example, in Black Ops 2, your first perk slot gave you the choice between Lightweight, Hardline, Blind Eye, Flak Jacket, and Ghost. Right there, you have 4 really powerful perks, and also Blind Eye. The extra speed and sprint distance from Lightweight was obviously great for a rushing class, but Hardline would be great for rushing because you get your score streaks faster. But you could have also run Ghost and be able to rush without being on the enemy radar, and create a stealthy rushing hybrid build. And if you want to be a strong objective player, Flak Jacket is going to be an obvious benefit. The enemy can't throw a grenade and keep you from capturing the B flag of domination, but if you use Hardline and get a couple kills while capturing, you could get your score streaks early and completely change the game. You could have also picked lightweight and got to the B flag faster than anyone else. And even though I make fun of blind eye, if you're playing with people who maybe aren't very good and enemies are constantly calling in score streaks of their own, being invisible to those score streaks could be really handy. You see how much thought and decision making went into just that one perk choice? There are 2 other perk classes for you to choose from in that game, and you can use the pick 10 system in Black Ops 2 to get another perk from each respective tier. There was so much that went into your class, and meanwhile in Modern Warfare 2, you just kind of pick a few perks and don't really think about it again. Aside from the gunsmith, you don't really think about your class a whole lot in this game. The only decision beyond your perks are your lethal and tactical grenades and then your field upgrade. Also, when it comes to perks, I hate how they're structured into their own packages rather than just existing as they are. It's like a loadout within your loadout. It's a nightmare to navigate and edit while adding nothing to the game at all. Speaking of things that separated COD from the other FPS games, the kill streaks in Modern Warfare 2 are pretty underwhelming. Now, before we get into the negatives, I want to give the developers some more credit because they settled another debate I thought we'd never see settled. In Modern Warfare 2, you have the option to toggle between kill streaks and score streaks, which is fantastic. Now, players who like kill streaks can use kill streaks, and players who like score streaks can use score streaks. It's a great system. I do wish you could toggle between the two in the middle of a match. I often use the quick play playlist for matchmaking, and again, because the UI doesn't work, I don't know what map or mode I'm playing until I get into the match. And if I'm playing an objective-based mode, I probably want to go with score streaks, but if it's team deathmatch, I'd rather be using kill streaks since the requirement is a little lower. Fixing the UI would go a long way to fixing that problem, but being able to swap mid-match would be really nice. That one positive out of the way, the kill streaks themselves are still really underwhelming. There isn't a kill streak in the game that I'm genuinely fearful of the enemy team calling in. There isn't the fear of God coursing through your veins in this game like there is when the enemy calls in an AC-130 in the original Modern Warfare 2, or a chopper gunner, or dogs in Black Ops 1 and 2. Hell, most of the time the highest kill streak I see anyone call in this game is a VTOL, which is this game's equivalent of a Harrier, or an attack chopper. And they usually get shot down really quickly since it seems like half the lobby has a rocket launcher just ready to go. Most matches, the only kill streaks you even see are UAVs and counter UAVs, which is just really boring. Call of Duty is a game where the rich get richer. The franchise rewards its good players for getting kills by giving them things that will get them more kills. The original Modern Warfare 2 did this, and perhaps overdid it if we're being honest. Black Ops 2 did it. Hell, even COD 4 and World at War did it. Even though the attack chopper and dogs were only 7 kills in those games, those kill streaks could tear through enemies. And here we are over a decade later, and kill streaks feel more like a mild boost at best and entirely irrelevant at worst. But hey, there's still plenty of time for Infinity Ward to make changes with its live service, so we'll keep an eye on it and see what they do. And that brings us to the progression system. Prestiging was a core part of what made the original Modern Warfare back in 2007 so special. The grind was basically endless for most people. If you actually made it to max rank at 10th Prestige, you probably felt pretty good about yourself. It was a great system, and they kept it and expanded on it throughout the years. Sometimes they would add another 5 or 10 Prestiges in a given game, and later they would add an additional 1000 levels at the end of 10th Prestige. Players who wanted to grind for rank and prestige were given an avenue, while players who just wanted to play the game didn't have to prestige at all if they didn't want to. Then the Modern Warfare reboot released and broke everything with seasonal prestige. Now instead of progressing through all 10 prestiges and a final 1000 levels throughout the game's lifecycle, you instead just had 1000 levels to get through. At first glance, it's not the worst change in the world. Players still got to see their rank increase the more time they played, and this time you didn't lose all your stuff. Part of the fun of prestiging was the dilemma of whether you wanted to prestige and start the grind again, and this new system didn't have that, but for all intents and purposes it was fine. Except for one problem. When the season ended, your prestige reset, which defeats the entire purpose of leveling up after the preseason. The fun of increasing your rank was literally watching that number go higher and higher. It's the game showing off the time you spent in the game, so when that number reset at the end of a season, it felt like that time was wasted, like it was a bad investment. The only way you would even know you had played during that season at all was by entering the combat record, where if you got to level 200, you got a little ribbon on your player card. And that was it, and I don't think anyone other than yourself can or ever even will look at it. So the franchise kept that awful system for a little while, and after people complained about it endlessly that entire time, Infinity Ward finally decided to change things ever so slightly with this game. The preseason level is still capped, but now for Season 1 you can progress from level 1 to 250. For Season 2 the level cap will be 500, then 750 for Season 3, 1000 for Season 4, and so on. Your rank will never reset in this game, but the cap will force players to grind over a longer period of real time, which is I think what they tried and failed to do with the seasonal prestige system. I'm still not sold on this being a great fix. It's a big improvement over the last system, but right now I'm seeing everyone with a similar rank. Whereas in prior games with the normal system, I would see players of all different levels and prestiges. Maybe we just need more time for player levels to spread out a bit, but you're still missing that dilemma of whether or not to start the grind again. It's a system I expect a lot of people will like, but I'm gonna wait a little longer before deciding for myself. But there's more to do than just increase your player rank. There's also weapon levels and unlocking attachments and camos. And Modern Warfare 2 did another weird thing in this regard by introducing the weapon platform system. I found this system really hard to understand at first, partially because of the poor UI, but basically instead of unlocking certain weapons by reaching a specific player rank, you now have to unlock weapons and attachments by reaching certain weapon ranks on specific guns. So for example, instead of unlocking the MP5 when you reach rank 20, you can now unlock the MP5 when you get your M16 to level 5, and you can unlock a red dot sight when you get your M4 to level 6 or whatever. You get the idea. I think the plan was to get players away from using meta weapons for every single match, and given how strong weapon variety is in this game, you'd be inclined to assume it's working as intended. I'm not so sure that's the case. I think this is happening partially due to this system, but I think it's also caused by the game having a strong sandbox with lots of viable weapons, and possibly most importantly, the requirements for unlocking the mastery camos are incredibly low in this game. We'll come back to the camos in just a second, but there's a lot going on with the weapon sandbox and its progression, and I don't think it's fair to say one element is causing the variety we're seeing. Unfortunately, this isn't a scientific test where only one thing at a time changes so we can isolate everything, but my hypothesis is that a lower mastery camo requirement, weapon platforms, and good balancing were all designed specifically in tandem to get players to use a variety of weapons. I think this was all intentionally done by Infinity Ward, and I want to give them credit for it. That being said, I do understand the problems people have with the platform system. For one, it is confusing as hell to understand how to unlock things. I think this is more a problem with the UI than a problem with the system itself, so we can let that slide for now. The bigger problem I have is how it can be unintentionally restrictive to players who like to do one or two specific things in multiplayer. For example, if you're a quickscoper, and that's all you buy COD to do, you probably don't want to grind down a light machine gun to get a laser or a barrel you want. I hate sniping in COD, for example, and I'm sure there's going to be something I want down the line that's locked behind a sniper or marksman rifle challenge, and I'm just going to struggle with it, and the entire time I do that, I'm going to be wishing for the old system to return, where I didn't have to use weapons I didn't like to progress. But if that's what it takes to get COD players to branch out, I'll take it. Going back to the camos, the mastery camo requirements are really low in this game, and I have mixed opinions on it. On the one hand, as someone who's been pretty casual when it comes to COD multiplayer over the past decade, it's nice to see that I can unlock gold camos without having to completely alter my playstyle and grind for a week at a time for one weapon. I can get that weapon to max level pretty quickly, and depending on how lucky I get with the challenges, it usually only takes 5 or 6 hours to unlock gold for a gun. On the other hand, I kind of missed when mastery camos felt a little more exclusive. When you saw someone had gold, diamond, or even dark matter camo on their guns, it really meant something. It was a huge point of pride for anyone who grinded out those challenges, and I have a feeling that won't be the case this time. In a couple months, I won't be surprised if everyone in every given lobby was using a gold or diamond gun. Orion, this game's equivalent of dark matter, will probably still be pretty exclusive, but not as exclusive as it once was. It's hard to have a strong opinion on this right now since so few people even have Orion camo at this point, so like with a lot of things, I'll keep an eye on it. So as a whole, I would say Modern Warfare 2 multiplayer is pretty middle of the road. It's a mixed bag. There's a lot of things I like about the game and a lot more things that I don't like or think could be improved. I wouldn't call it a bad game, but it's probably not a game I would go out of my way to play if it weren't for the channel. That being said, given what COD has gone through over the past decade, there's a really good argument to be made that this is the best COD game in the past decade. So technically, actually, Black Ops 2 is a decade old as of a few weeks ago, and this game isn't nearly as good as that. But if you start from Ghost onward, it has a really strong case. I would definitely say this multiplayer is better than Ghost and Advanced Warfare. Black Ops 3 is definitely the best of the advanced movement games in the franchise, but personally I'd rather play this. The only reason I would even consider Black Ops 3 over Modern Warfare 2 is I could get dark matter and use it in zombies. I never finished that grind, so getting that would be nice, but from a gameplay perspective, I'd rather play this. Infinite Warfare has pay-to-win elements, and this game doesn't have it, at least for now, so we'll go with Modern Warfare 2 there. It's better than World War II. For me, it's better than Black Ops 4, but if you're more into hero shooters and competitive play, then I can definitely see an argument in Black Ops 4's favor. And this probably has a better multiplayer than any of the live service era games. The only close contender for me is Cold War, and the sniper abuse makes Modern Warfare 2's flinch problems look like a joke. So there's a really good case that Modern Warfare 2 might have the best multiplayer in the last decade, and it's also a really mixed bag and quite mediocre, so take that for what you will. I'll keep my thoughts on Spec Ops brief since, I'll be honest, Infinity Ward didn't try. At least for the launch product, Spec Ops was a complete afterthought. The game launched with exactly 3 missions. 3. The original Modern Warfare 2 released with 23. So yeah, Spec Ops was an afterthought. They barely tried. It's worth mentioning that while there aren't many Spec Ops missions, they are fun for what they are. They're basically just an extra campaign mission with less story progression. They're 15 to 20 minutes long, you do whatever objective the game wants you to do, and then you're done. For some reason, all of the Spec Ops missions are forced co-op, which is going to make playing this a few years down the line an absolute nightmare. You could technically play them solo if you're lucky enough to start a match and have no one join you or have your teammate leave, but they are balanced for co-op, which makes things a little tricky, especially if you're going for all 3 stars. So yeah, prepare for this entire third mode to be unplayable in 4 to 5 years' time. It seems like Infinity Ward's goal with Spec Ops was with its live service. We already got a new mission for Season 1, and raids are supposed to be a part of Spec Ops as well, so the mode will likely improve over time. What I have a hard time understanding is why there are so few modes at launch. The original Modern Warfare 2 launched with an additional 20 missions nearly 15 years ago, and that game went through some development hell. 2 years later, Modern Warfare 3 launches with the best Spec Ops in the entire franchise. You had 16 missions at launch, which is a step down from Modern Warfare 2, but still very, very acceptable. And to compensate, you had an entire PvE survival mode like Zombies with its own difficulty, economy, and everything. And on top of that, you got an additional 8 missions, 13 survival maps, and an entirely new Chaos Survival mode all through DLC. So it's not like it's a one or the other type of thing. Infinity Ward already shows you themselves that you could have a content-rich game at launch and then add even more through DLC with Modern Warfare 3. And after a decade to learn from, it seems like all they learned is that they don't have to try with their third mode. So unless the new missions and raids are literally the best thing we've ever seen in Spec Ops, it looks like the best days for this mode are in the rearview mirror. So the launch content for Modern Warfare 2 is a bit of a mixed bag, but what does Season 1 have for us? Well, as far as free content goes, not a whole lot. So I'm going to put the Season 1 roadmap on screen and we'll go through it piece by piece. If you're just listening, you should be able to follow along just fine. First and foremost, Season 1 marks the beginning of Warzone 2.0, and the roadmap makes that a big point of focus. And while I got nothing against Battle Royales or their fans, they're not exactly content from Modern Warfare 2. Warzone 2 is really an entirely different game. So as someone who doesn't have any interest in Battle Royales of any kind, I could take the whole top left corner and cross it out. And if I move to the right, I can also cross out another huge chunk, since a third of the right-hand side of the screen is dedicated to limited time operator bundles based on some of the best football players in the world. Now, even though I'm an American, I have nothing against soccer or football, but I do have a problem with Qatar committing dozens of human rights violations, so supporting the sport right now is a lot to ask. And considering paid cosmetics that are probably going to go for an outrageous amount of money as new content is also a lot to ask. By the way, I should clarify, I'm not equating a $20 cosmetic to murder, which is what Qatar is doing, but you get what I'm going for here. It's also bad. It's bad too. So just by crossing out Warzone, which is an entirely different game and probably shouldn't even be part of this roadmap, and by crossing out paid cosmetics supporting one of the most corrupt organizations in the world, we've eliminated half of the content they're marketing and selling with this Season 1 update. And speaking of things they're selling, there are more bundles underneath the World Cup bundles that we can go ahead and cross out for the same reason. It's paid content and I don't care about it. And if we're being sticklers about only free content, we could also cross out the Battle Pass as well, Now, thankfully for me, I had some leftover COD points from prior battle passes, so I was able to just spend $5 to get this one, and hopefully I'll earn enough COD points to get the rest of the battle passes as they release over the next 2 years. I should mention the battle pass since it is different this year, and a lot of people have overhyped the changes they've made to it. Rather than a strictly linear side-scrolling system, you instead have a map that you slowly unlock with tokens that you earn from playing the game. It gamifies the battle pass in a small way, but functionally it's more or less identical to everything prior. It's a cool update, but I think I prefer Halo Infinite's method of you just have the battle pass forever, because I believe with Modern Warfare 2, you will lose the battle pass if you don't complete it within a specific time frame. I like the change, it's just not the change I was particularly looking for with this series. Anyway, you can use the battle pass to unlock 2 new weapons and a new operator. Operators in this game aren't like how they were in Vanguard, where they had their own progression system. Infinity Ward went back to how it was in Modern Warfare and Cold War, where you just pick them based on whatever voice lines you like. Beyond that, there's literally no reason to pick one over the other, so I don't particularly care about this. Season 1 also promises a weapon you can unlock outside of the Battle Pass, but unfortunately you have to play DMZ to unlock it, which is technically a part of Warzone. So we're just going to cross it out like we did for Warzone content, and even though there is one final weapon listed that's coming in season, given where it is on the roadmap relative to everything else, I'm going to assume it is also unlockable in DMZ only, so for right now we're going to cross it out as well. And that leaves us with the content you can unlock and play in Modern Warfare 2 without playing any other games or paying any real-life money. We have one map, which is a remake, another map in season, which is also a remake and plays in a similar fast, chaotic clusterfuck way as the last map, one new Spec Ops mission that might take you half an hour to complete, a raid, which is in season and we're not entirely sure what it is exactly, a CDL mosh pit, the inclusion of a hardcore playlist that for some reason wasn't important enough to include on this roadmap at all, and 2 operators, both of which are in season and may even have to be unlocked in Warzone, DMZ, or through the in-game store. We don't know yet. That's all the new content you're getting for not just the next 2 months, but the rest of the calendar year. By the time Season 2 comes out, the holidays are going to be over. It's going to be 2023. The game will have been out for nearly 3 months, and if you bought the game with the sole intention to play the multiplayer and nothing else, all you'll have to show for it are 2 remade maps, 1 Spec Ops mission, a raid, possibly 2 new operators, and 2 new playlists. That's it. Not a great start to the live service, but as a fan of Halo Infinite, it's actually looking okay in comparison. So if that's your measurement, good job. So the last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up here is the rumored content for the second year of this game, because even though none of it is confirmed or even particularly relevant at this point, I think it's really interesting and I don't really have another place to talk about it. So the current rumor says that Treyarch's next game is going to be delayed a year into 2024, and for that 1-year anniversary of Modern Warfare 2 in 2023, Sledgehammer is going to release remastered versions of all of the original Modern Warfare 2 maps, the ones from 2009, as well as some kind of campaign DLC. The rumors also state that this content won't be part of the live service, but instead as a premium $70 expansion, which is wild. If this turns out to be true, and this is what happens in a year's time, I have no idea how players casual and hardcore alike are going to react, and I'm fascinated to see what they do. On the one hand, this is absolutely going to split the player base, just like map packs have always done since the dawn of time. And I'm calling it a map pack because for most people, that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be a $70 map pack, which is $10 more than the entirety of the original Modern Warfare 2, which had a Spec Ops and a campaign. While I love COD campaigns, most people don't play them. That campaign DLC is going to go untouched by a lot of people. This is a $70 map pack. Speaking of the campaigns, though, what on earth are they even going to do with that campaign DLC? There's a lot of places they could go with it, given the end of Modern Warfare 2's campaign. If there's going to be even more places they could go if they integrate whatever live service story they shove into Warzone or future seasons of this game, that is something I'm very interested in seeing. Whether the interest is because it's a good game that's worth playing, or if it's more akin to watching a car crash, remains to be seen. Equally as interesting as this DLC existing at all is that it's allegedly being made by Sledgehammer Games, which is a decision that's both fascinating and perplexing. The rumored reason for extending Modern Warfare 2's life cycle at all was to give the other studios extra time to catch up on their own projects. Treyarch, of course, had to push Cold War out a year earlier than intended 2 years ago, and they had a large hand in helping Sledgehammer with Vanguard last year. Hell, they made pretty much everything related to Vanguard zombies as far as I'm aware, and this year they're still helping Infinity Ward with their ranked mode from Modern Warfare 2. So aside from the ranked mode, Treyarch is going to benefit from that increased development time, and as a zombies fan, I'm absolutely here for it. On the other hand, Activision is now forcing Sledgehammer, a studio with an already questionable track record, to jump straight from Vanguard into a new project that needs to be done within a year's time, and presumably be on par with what Infinity Ward has already done over the past 3 years, given they're charging full price for it. If you do the math, you can tell something doesn't quite add up. Is Infinity Ward going to be helping Sledgehammer with the remakes? Do they have a heavy hand in what the campaign DLC would be? It's their story after all. What does this even mean for the future of Sledgehammer Games as a third developer? Are we going to see a new development cycle where Infinity Ward makes a game that lasts 2 years, followed by Treyarch releasing a game that lasts 2 years? There's so many questions surrounding this rumor, and I'm fascinated to see what happens next. Wrap up. As a whole, Modern Warfare 2 is a mixed bag. While it does some things exceptionally well, it also does a greater number of things extremely poorly. It is a very mediocre game as a whole, and yet might be one of the best games the franchise has released in the last decade. The campaign has one of the worst, boring, and nonsensical plots of any game in the franchise, yet also has some of the best character writing and dialogue in the entire series. The multiplayer has some standout features, but is largely the same as the last 3 entries, while changing aspects nobody asked to change simply for the sake of it. The developers just didn't even try when it comes to Spec Ops, and the bulk of Season 1 content is for Warzone, DMZ, and overpriced microtransactions, leaving fans of a standard multiplayer experience out to dry. This is an impossible game for me to recommend. While it's not a terrible game in and of itself, it doesn't do anything special or unique to make it stand out in a good way, unless you need that COD fix. There are plenty of other games I would recommend you try out instead. If you happen to find it on sale during the upcoming Black Friday or various other holiday sales, then yeah, it might be worth picking up out of curiosity. Otherwise, I'd save your money and stay away from this one. I spent my money so you didn't have to. But those are just my thoughts. Of course, let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Like the video if you made it this far. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.